I became passionate about classical music from a very early age. I think when I was about 4, a relative bought a little toy organ for me for Christmas, and I just started picking out tunes. It kind of started from there. A few years later, I joined the local library, which was really well stocked with records. So I discovered a huge amount of classical music there. There was no music in our home. My parents are not musical. I kind of found my own way to it, really, which was a bit unlikely somehow. I remember lots of pieces of music that made me feel good to listen to. And I also remember going to my first concerts at the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic, because I'm from Liverpool. So I remember coming out of those concerts, whatever was played, and I was on a high for weeks afterwards, thinking of a piece that made me feel good that I would have played. I was given a piece called, well, it's the Prokofiev Takata, when I was about 13 years old, to learn by my teacher. I couldn't get anywhere near it. I just wasn't good enough to play it. But the thought that I might be good enough to play it really made me feel good. And I think by the time I was about 15, I think I developed enough chops to be able to get my fingers around it. It starts like this. So it's this very sort of motoric, relentless kind of piece. It gets very difficult after that, and I'm not going to attempt to play it because I haven't played it since I was about 18. But the feeling of being able to do it, I think when I was around 15, that made me feel very good. Just that physical feeling of being able to play something as technically difficult as that, which, I never really thought I'd be able to. Certainly in this past year of the pandemic, of course it's been devastating in so many ways, but it's also been a great opportunity to discover areas of repertoire that you really just wouldn't have had the opportunity otherwise, and the time to do it, because you're just on the treadmill of what you're doing. So yeah, I've been exploring more Russian repertoire, more French repertoire, some contemporary stuff. I've been learning the Copland Piano Concerto, which nobody ever does, but it'd be great fun to do that at some point. And a lot of Mozart concertos, filling all the gaps in my Mozart concerto repertoire, which has just been such a huge pleasure. Having the time to explore all that is wonderful, but it's a completely different type of work. You end up playing really badly to yourself, which is fine. Just the idea of playing that badly in public, or with anybody else's ears around, is excruciating. So you have to really gear up, when you have a deadline. Good Mozart playing for me certainly involves a sense of singing and speaking. There's a lot in Mozart that is very vocal. I think he thinks very vocally as a composer. And for it to be spoken is also important. I think of music as a language that has vowels and consonants. And I think that has to be very clear in your articulation. With Mozart, it's also a question of sound and color and sound quality. So I think you have to craft your sound and craft all your vowels and consonants and words and sung lines. It all matters. Every single note matters so much. And that's really one of the main characteristics of Mozart in piano playing. I came to this piece about 12, 13 years ago. I played it for the first time. And it's, to me, I think the most unique of all Mozart's piano concertos. I mean, they're all unique, of course, but when you look at the others, you can see them in terms of very defined characters. Like you have the C major, the big C major K503, which is very symphonic in its character. It's also quite funny in the last movement. And then you've got the minor key concertos, the D minor and the C minor, which are very dramatic, and driven in a way. This piece doesn't have anything like that. In fact, to try to describe the character of this piece, it's much more elusive, really. There's something nostalgic about it. It's lyrical. I think of it as almost Schubertian. There's a sense of longing about it. The last movement, for instance, that has this 6/8 theme. There's a sense of looking back about that in the... Something about the shape of the melody. Tempo is incredibly important in this piece for the sake of the character. If it goes too fast, it begins to sound silly and banal. To me, this piece is a departure in Mozart's style. It's almost like it was the start of a different period in his life that just happened to be his last piano concerto. It's a really fascinating piece. Difficult to play in terms of nailing the character. You know, when a character of a piece is as elusive as this, it's much harder to get across, you know, what that means in terms of sound and convincing people of what it is. But that's part of the challenge of it. That's what makes it so fascinating. I think when you compare different movements within the same piece, of course there are always contrasts. In the case of this piece, the slow movement has a sense of being untouchable. You know, it's like you're seeing something slightly from a distance that you can't quite reach. It's this... Sorry. You know, it's incredibly beautiful, but there's something slightly distant about it. It doesn't come and hug you. It's not that kind of music. It has the sense of something that you're admiring from a distance. And then you have the last movement with its nostalgia, which also, it's a complete contrast in character, but there's still something we used to have that we can't have anymore. You know, it's that longing for something. So there's also a connection there for me in the character between these two movements.